That's pretty much what I do. And there have been periods where there's been a lot of wait and see and not a lot's happened. And this is a period where there's a lot of finding out going on rather than waiting and seeing. And it's a very, very fast moving dynamic time. But I think to answer the second part of the question, the only way we can interpret what's happening at the moment is either chasing around like a headless chicken from headline to headline going, wow, 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 which frankly is a lot of people in markets, or take a big picture view and understand what that is. And I've tried to wrap that up since Trump was reelected. In fact, the day he was reelected, I published on it, saying we would see a shift from economic policy, which we all understand. Anyone watching this knows what economic policy is by different area: fiscal, monetary, FX, trade, energy, yada, 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 to economic statecraft. And the key difference between policy and statecraft is with statecraft, you combine all of them together like fingers and a thumb into a fist. And it can be offensive or defensive, but you're doing it with a purpose. And you ask yourself this question: what is GDP for? That's my big shtick. What is GDP for? Once you start answering that question, how you do everything else and how they all line up is obvious to you, because you have to do X, Y, Z, regardless of what the rules say or markets say. But until you ask yourself that question, you don't join anything up, and nothing that you're doing has any strategic sense. So we're now in a world of economic statecraft. And in fact, we're moving rapidly along the spectrum of economic statecraft from defensive to offensive, and into whole new isms, like you're hearing neo-imperialism being thrown around at the moment for good reason. So it's absolutely at the cutting edge of economic statecraft where we are now.
Well, and so it's interesting because you come at this from an analytical background or an event, but as you said at the beginning, you don't yourself manage money. And I come at it from the same, sort of analytical framework, but I do manage money. And I think you agree, but correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe 10 or 15 years ago, those two different areas didn't necessarily have to intersect. They might from time to time. But I think we both think that we are now in a time period where you cannot separate the two. In other words, it was a luxury we had maybe 10 or 15 years ago that we just no longer have. And you said that you laid this out on when Trump was reelected. But the truth is, if you go back and look at your writings for the last 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, you've been talking about this stuff for almost a decade now. And what's interesting is that for a while, we would talk about it and then wait to see. But now we're actually seeing it. And in the last kind of 12 to 18 months, it's been picking up speed. And in the last 12 or 18 days, it's picking up speed even more. So maybe, before we get too much further into this as well, you could just talk about what that's been like, to talk about the maybe and the possibility to now not only the probability, but the reality.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a very exciting time for all of us. Nerve-wracking, stressful. I'm not going to lie, it's kind of rewarding, even if it's also disturbing to see things that you were flagging as tail risks unfold. You're very kind, thank you, to refer to the fact that since basically 2014, 2015, I started writing on this theme. 2016, absolutely nailing it down and saying, look, the liberal world order can collapse. They have collapsed twice in the past. The path we're on now will lead to a repeat of that collapse, because we have a global paradigm whereby the only thing propping everything up, if you look behind the back of the stage, is American military power. And the economic and financial system that America is doing is best to prop up undermines its military power, because it doesn't have the factories to build the military goods to maintain that kind of power on a sustained basis. Other people are going to see that, are going to rearm. Power abhors a vacuum, and you're going to end up with a US-China clash, with others siding with China and some being forced to side with the US, and it is increasingly being forced to side with it. And the world will split, the liberal world order will collapse, and everything that you think you understand about how markets work will come tumbling down. So that's been the big picture view. But where it kind of specifically, the rubber meets the road, so to say, is I remember talking to a mutual friend of ours, Adam Taggart, great guy, again, just after Trump was reelected. And we were having a similar conversation. And he said, so look, for the average investor in the US or investor in US assets, what does that really mean? So Trump's been reelected. You're talking economic statecraft. Should you be bullish on the defense sector, for example, because Trump's got a re-arm? And I said to him, well, yes and no. I said, because from an economic policy perspective, you're going to throw money at defense. Ergo, that sector does well. From an economic statecraft perspective, you ask yourself, am I getting value for money? Are shareholders really minting it in a company that's charging $100 for a $1 widget because they're a monopoly in the defense sector? And from a financial perspective, that's where you go. From a statecraft perspective, you knock on the door of the defense firm and you say, I want that down to $1.50 ASAP. I don't care what it does to your P&L because I need those widgets. You don't win a war with profits. You win a war with bullets.